Trump, The Art of the Deal, by Donald J. Trump with Tony Schwartz. Introduction. Imagine this for a moment. It's the heart of New York City, Central Park. For 6 long years, a beloved landmark, the Wollman skating rink, sits derelict. It's a construction site frozen in time, a monument to government failure. The city has already spent $13 million, 6 times the original budget, and they've just announced it will take another 2 years to finish. 2 more years of disappointment for the thousands of families who just want to go ice skating. The whole city is frustrated. It's become a running joke, a symbol of everything wrong with bureaucracy. Then, a man steps forward. A young, brash real estate developer, not yet 40 years old, who sees this public embarrassment from his apartment window every single day. He writes a letter to the mayor, Ed Koch, and makes an audacious offer. He says, "Let me take over. I will rebuild this rink myself. I'll pay for it, and I will have it open in 6 months, before winter." The city laughs him off. The mayor sends back a sarcastic reply, basically telling him to put his money where his mouth is, but never really believing he'd do it. But the public, and the press, they don't laugh. They're captivated. They see a man willing to put himself on the line to fix something that's broken. The pressure builds, and in a stunning reversal, the city finally says yes. The young developer gets to work. He doesn't just meet his 6-month deadline, he beats it. In just under 4 months, and for $750,000 under budget, the Wollman Rink is rebuilt, pristine, and open to the public. That young developer was Donald J. Trump, and that story, in many ways, is the perfect entry point into the mindset we're going to explore today. We are diving into his 1987 blockbuster book, Trump, The Art of the Deal. This isn't just a book about real estate. It's a rare look inside the mind of a master dealmaker during the decade he took over the New York City skyline. It became a #1 bestseller, staying on the list for nearly a year, and it has sold millions of copies worldwide, shaping the ambitions of a generation of entrepreneurs. Today, I'm going to share the timeless lessons from this book. We're going to pull back the curtain on how monumental deals are made. You'll learn why a person's biggest strength is their imagination, why sometimes your best investments are the ones you don't make, and how to turn a bad situation into your greatest advantage. By the end of our time together, you won't just understand the principles of the deal. You'll understand the art of turning a bold vision into a concrete reality. So, let's begin. Book summary. To understand the art of the deal, you first have to understand the artist. And for Donald Trump, making deals wasn't just a business. It was his art form. As he puts it, other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals, preferably big deals. That's how I get my kicks. This wasn't about the money. He says he had more than he would ever need. For him, it was about the game itself. The thrill was in the playing. His life wasn't structured with endless, formal meetings. He played it loose, keeping his door open, preferring to see what each day would bring. This approach allowed for imagination, for the kind of entrepreneurial thinking that can't survive in a rigid, corporate structure. A typical day could involve over 100 phone calls, dozens of spontaneous meetings, and a constant flow of information and opportunity. But this mindset, this drive to build and to win, didn't come from nowhere. It was forged in his childhood, deeply influenced by one man, his father, Fred Trump. Fred's story was the classic American dream. His own father died when he was just 11, forcing him to become the man of the house. He started by building garages for neighbors, and by the time he was out of high school, he was building and selling single-family homes in Queens. His company was called Elizabeth Trump & Son because he wasn't even old enough to sign his own checks. His mother had to do it for him. Growing up, Donald and his brother Robert would tag along with their father to construction sites. And what he learned from his father wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about a philosophy. Fred Trump's mantra was simple: get in, get it done right, and get out. He was a master of efficiency. He knew the cost of everything, down to the last penny, and he was an incredibly tough negotiator. He taught his son that every penny counts, because pennies turn into dollars. To this day, Trump says he'll still pick up the phone to argue with a contractor over a few $1,000s, not just to save the money, but because it's the principle of not being taken advantage of. Fred Trump was a demanding taskmaster. He'd be at his sites at 6 in the morning, pounding and pushing. He'd start a building in Brooklyn at the same time as two competitors nearby, and he would invariably finish his project months before they did. His buildings would look a little better, the lobbies would be nicer, and he'd rent them out quickly. Often, his competitors would go bankrupt, and his father would step in and buy their unfinished buildings at a discount. This was the world Donald Trump grew up in, a world of toughness, relentless drive, and an obsession with detail and cost. But there was a crucial difference between father and son. Fred was content building rent-controlled housing in Brooklyn and Queens. It was a tough, grinding business with very low profit margins. You had to use red brick because it was a penny a brick cheaper than tan brick. Donald admired his father's success, but he knew very early on that he wanted something different. Something grander, more glamorous, more exciting. He realized that if he ever wanted to be known as more than Fred Trump's son, he had to make his own mark. And for him, that meant one place: Manhattan. This ambition wasn't always channeled perfectly. He admits to being an aggressive kid, even giving a music teacher a black eye in the 2nd grade because he didn't think the teacher knew anything about music. This led his father to send him to the New York Military Academy, hoping a little discipline would help channel that aggression into achievement. It worked. He learned how to operate within a structure, how to respect authority without being intimidated by it, and rose to become a captain of the cadets. After graduating from the Wharton School of Finance, he moved into a tiny studio apartment in Manhattan. It was a dark, dingy little place, but he says moving in was probably more exciting for him than moving into the top of Trump Tower years later. He was a kid from the outer boroughs who had finally arrived in the center of the world. He immediately set out to understand this new world. He joined the club, which at the time was the hottest, most exclusive spot in the city, a place where successful men and beautiful women gathered. Getting in wasn't easy. He was a complete unknown. When he called to ask about membership, the person on the phone literally laughed at him. But he was persistent. He kept calling, finally got the name of the club's president, and convinced the man to meet him. He promised he wouldn't try to steal the wives of the older, wealthy members, and he was in. The club became his classroom. He was working while he was out at night, learning how the New York scene operated and meeting the people he would one day make deals with. But watching from the sidelines wasn't his style. He was looking for his first big deal. And this brings us to the first, and perhaps most important, of his trump cards, the core principles that define his art of the deal. That first card is, think big. Trump says it's very simple: if you're going to be thinking anyway, you might as well think big. Most people think small because they're afraid of success, afraid of making decisions, afraid of winning. That fear, he believes, gives people like him a huge advantage. He wasn't satisfied just earning a good living. He wanted to make a statement, to build something monumental. This wasn't just about building taller buildings. It was a mindset. His first big project on his own wasn't a small apartment building in Queens. It was a massive, 1,200-unit apartment development in Cincinnati called Swifton Village. He and his father found it by reading through lists of government foreclosures, something he did in college while his friends were reading the sports pages. The project was a disaster. It was only 2/3 occupied, the developers had gone bankrupt, and the government just wanted to get rid of it. But where everyone else saw a failure, he saw an opportunity. They bought the entire 1,200-unit complex for less than $6 million, which was half of what it cost to build just a few years earlier. Better yet, they were able to get a mortgage for the full purchase price, meaning they got the entire project without putting down a single dollar of their own money. Thinking big meant seeing the upside. It takes almost the same amount of energy to manage 50 units as it does 1,200, but with 1,200, the potential reward is exponentially greater. They invested in cosmetic improvements, like adding clean, white shutters and new doors, which gave the cold brick buildings a feeling of warmth and home. They kept the property impeccably clean. Within a year, the buildings were 100% rented. A few years later, acting on a tip from a tenant that the surrounding neighborhood was declining, he sold the entire complex for $12 million, a $6 million profit on a deal that cost him nothing to get into. Thinking big is about having a vision. But vision alone is not enough. This leads to the second trump card: protect the downside, and the upside will take care of itself. People think of him as a gambler, he says, but he insists he's never gambled in his life. A gambler plays the slot machines. He prefers to own the slot machines. He's not a believer in the power of positive thinking. He believes in the power of negative thinking. He always goes into a deal anticipating the worst. If you can live with the worst-case scenario, the good will take care of itself. His first moves into Atlantic City are a perfect example of this. When he heard that a single casino hotel could generate more profit than an entire chain of regular hotels, his interest was sparked. This was in the mid-70s, when New Jersey was considering legalizing gambling in the depressed resort town. Speculators were rushing in, buying up tiny properties for hugely inflated prices, betting that the gambling referendum would pass. Trump decided to wait. He knew that if the referendum failed, those properties would be worth almost nothing overnight. He preferred to pay a higher price for a sure thing than a low price for a gamble. When the referendum did pass, and he finally assembled a prime site on the boardwalk, he still didn't rush to build. He waited to get his gaming license first. This meant paying carrying costs on the land for longer, but it protected him from spending hundreds of millions on construction only to be denied a license at the last minute, which is exactly what happened to Baron Hilton just a few years later. Once he had his site and his license, Holiday Inns approached him to be his partner. Some people told him, "Why give up 50% of your profits?" But Holiday Inns offered to pay back all the money he had already invested, finance the entire construction, and guarantee him against any losses for 5 years. The choice was simple: own 100% of a project with all the risk, or own 50% with zero risk. It was an easy decision. He protected the downside. This principle is tied to another trump card: maximize your options. He never gets too attached to one deal or one approach. He keeps a lot of balls in the air, because most deals, no matter how promising they seem, fall apart. And for every deal he makes, he always has several different ways to make it work. This was never more true than with his very first foray into Manhattan. Back in 1974, he got an option on the massive, abandoned Penn Central rail yards on the west side of Manhattan. It was 100 acres of undeveloped riverfront property. His first plan was to build middle-income housing with government financing. But then New York City's financial crisis hit, and the money for public housing dried up. He didn't waste time feeling sorry for himself. He immediately switched to his second option, promoting the site as the perfect location for a new convention center. For years, The city had been trying to build a convention center on a different, much more difficult site over the water. Trump launched a public campaign, holding press conferences and relentlessly pointing out the flaws of the other sites and the strengths of his own. He argued his site was more accessible, cheaper to build on, and had more room for expansion. It took years of pushing, but ultimately, the city agreed and chose his site for what is now the Jacob Javits Convention Center. He had maximized his options, and when his first plan failed, his second plan succeeded. But how do you convince a city, a bank, or a partner that your way is the right way? This brings us to one of the most crucial elements of his art: use your leverage. Leverage, he says, is the biggest strength you can have. It's having something the other guy wants, or needs, or simply cannot do without. But often, leverage isn't something you have. It's something you create through imagination and salesmanship. The story of the Commodore Hotel is the ultimate masterclass in creating leverage from nothing. In 1974, the area around Grand Central Station was decaying. The Commodore, a massive old hotel right next to the station, was losing millions, defaulting on its taxes, and was just a filthy, dingy, run-down mess. But on a morning walk, Trump saw what others missed. He saw thousands of well-dressed commuters pouring out of Grand Central. He realized the problem wasn't the location, it was the hotel. The location was superb. He was just 27 years old, with hardly any track record in Manhattan. He had to convince the hotel's owner, the bankrupt Penn Central Railroad, to give him an option. He had to convince a major hotel operator, Hyatt, to partner with him. He had to convince the banks to lend him money when no one was lending in New York. And most audaciously, he had to convince the city to give him a massive, 40-year tax abatement that no one had ever received before. He was juggling all of these pieces at once, and none of them would fall into place without the others. The banks wouldn't lend without the tax abatement. The city wouldn't give the abatement without a firm financing commitment. And Hyatt wouldn't fully commit without the other pieces in place. So he created leverage. With the city, he used fear. He convinced the owners of the Commodore to announce that they were planning to close the hotel for good. This created the specter of a massive, boarded-up building in the heart of Midtown, a visual wound that would be a disaster for an already struggling city. Suddenly, his plan to transform the hotel didn't seem like a developer's dream, it seemed like the city's only hope. With the banks, he played on their sense of moral obligation. He told them, "You owe it to New York. If you won't invest in your own city, how can you expect it to turn around?" And with Hyatt, he leveraged their ambition. Hyatt was a successful chain, but they had no flagship hotel in New York City, and he knew they wanted one badly. He was offering them the key to the city on a silver platter. The negotiation for the tax abatement was a high-stakes poker game. Other hotel owners were furious, arguing he was getting an unfair advantage. A city councilman held a press conference to denounce the deal. But Trump's posture was to take the offensive. When a reporter asked him why he got a 40-year tax abatement, he famously replied, "Because I didn't ask for 50. In the end, the city, desperate to see development, gave him the deal. With the abatement secured, the banks finally came through with financing. He completely transformed the old, crumbling Commodore into the sleek, modern, glass-sheathed Grand Hyatt Hotel. It was a spectacular success from its first day, revitalizing the entire 42nd Street neighborhood and proving that leverage, even when created out of thin air, can move mountains. The Grand Hyatt story also illustrates another one of his key principles: enhance your location. Everyone says the key to real estate is location, location, location. Trump says that's only half the story. You don't necessarily need the best location, you need the best deal. And you can enhance a location through promotion and psychology. This brings us to his masterpiece, Trump Tower. The site of the old Bonwit Teller store at 57th Street and 5th Avenue was already arguably the best location in New York City. But Trump didn't just build a building there, he created a legend. He set out to sell not just apartments, but an event, a fantasy. First, he had to get the property. For years, he wrote letters to the owner, Franklin Jarman, who told him he was crazy to even think he would ever sell. Trump was relentless. Then, years later, he read in a magazine that Jarman had been pushed out and a new CEO, John Hannigan, had been brought in to save the struggling parent company by selling off assets. At 9 o'clock the next morning, he was on the phone with Hannigan, who said, "Yeah, you're the guy who has been writing all those letters. When would you like to meet?" Timing, persistence, and a little bit of luck had finally paid off. Assembling the site was a deal-making puzzle of incredible complexity. He not only bought the Bonwit building and its lease, but he also had to acquire the underlying land from the Equitable Life Assurance Society, which he did by forming a partnership with them. Then, he went to Walter Hoving, the legendary head of the adjacent Tiffany & Co., to buy his air rights, the right to build in the space above Tiffany's store. This negotiation with Hoving reveals so much about dealing with different types of people. Trump showed Hoving two models. One was the beautiful, terraced building he wanted to build. The other was a hideous, skinny tower with tiny, wire mesh windows that he would be forced to build if he didn't get the air rights, an ugly monolith that would loom over Tiffany's forever. He told Hoving, "I'm offering you $5 million to let me preserve Tiffany." Hoving, a man of impeccable integrity, liked the concept and shook his hand. "Young man," he said, "I made a deal with you." That's that. Even when other air rights deals were made for far more money while Hoving was on vacation, he honored their handshake. He was a man of his word. With the site assembled, Trump set out to create a building that was larger than life. This is where he mastered another principle: get the word out. He says, "I play to people's fantasies. People want to believe that something is the biggest, the greatest, the most spectacular." He calls it truthful hyperbole. It's an innocent form of exaggeration, and a very effective form of promotion. Trump Tower was promoted as an event. The atrium was a jaw-dropping, 6-story space of rare pink breccia perniche marble, polished brass, and an 80-foot waterfall. The design was a striking, sawtooth shape with 28 sides, ensuring that every apartment had spectacular, panoramic views in multiple directions. He positioned Trump Tower as the only place for a certain kind of wealthy, glamorous person to live. And it worked. Celebrities and wealthy international buyers flocked to the building, paying unprecedented prices. When a rival luxury building, Museum Tower, priced its apartments lower, Trump wasn't worried. He knew that by pricing lower, they had just announced to the world that they weren't as good as Trump Tower. The kind of buyer he was after didn't want the best buy, they wanted the best. Of course, promotion is one thing. You also have to follow another critical rule: deliver the goods. You can't con people, at least not for long. As much as he promoted the hell out of Trump Tower, he also built a product of incredible quality. He spent what it took to make it the best. For the atrium's marble, he and his team went to the quarry and personally marked off the finest slabs, scrapping nearly 60% of the total stone to avoid any imperfections. He used the finest craftsmen. This obsession with quality is what created the mystical aura that made Trump Tower the hottest ticket in town. But even with a great success on his hands, he still had to fight back. This is another one of his core beliefs. When people treat you unfairly, you fight back, hard. After Trump Tower was built, the city, led by Mayor Koch, denied him a standard tax exemption called a 421A, which was given to virtually every other developer to encourage construction. Koch's administration positioned it as taking on a greedy developer building for the rich. But Trump believed he was legally entitled to it, and that the city was playing politics. He sued. He fought them in 6 different courts over several years. People told him he was crazy, that it was a no-win situation politically. But he refused to fold. And in the end, he won, forcing the city to grant him the exemption. This aggressive, never-back-down attitude wasn't just reserved for politics. He took the same approach in business. After taking on Holiday Inns as a partner in Atlantic City, he grew deeply dissatisfied with their management of the casino they built together. The partnership soured, and he eventually fought to buy out their share, taking full control of the facility he renamed Trump Plaza. But then, in a brilliant move that shows how he never lets an opportunity pass, he turned around and started buying up stock in the Holiday Inn's parent company. The stock price soared on speculation that he was planning a takeover. Holiday Inns, trying to fend him off, restructured the company and took on massive debt. At that point, Trump sold all his stock, walking away with a profit of many millions of dollars. In effect, he earned back a huge chunk of the money he had just paid them to buy out their share of his casino. The one time he didn't follow his own rule of protecting the downside was with the United States Football League, the USFL. He bought the New Jersey Generals in 1983. It was a failing team in a failing league, but he saw it as a fun, long-shot fantasy, a chance to own a pro football team and take on the monopoly of the NFL. He believed the USFL's biggest mistake was playing in the spring, when fan and television interest was low. He pushed his fellow owners to move the league to the fall to compete directly with the NFL. His plan was simple: either one of the 3 networks would give them a fall television contract, or the league would have a strong antitrust case against the NFL for monopolizing the airwaves. He invested heavily, signing star players like Heisman Trophy winner Herschel Walker and quarterback Doug Flutie. He turned the Generals into a winning team that drew huge crowds. But many of his fellow owners lacked his resources and his vision. The league struggled. And when the networks, under pressure from the NFL, refused to offer a fall contract, the USFL filed its antitrust suit. They won the case. The jury found that the NFL was an illegal monopoly that had damaged the USFL. But in a stunning and bizarre twist, they awarded the league only $1 in damages. It was a hollow victory. Without a significant financial award, the league couldn't survive. The USFL folded. It was a deal that didn't work out, a long shot that didn't pay off. But even in failure, he learned a valuable lesson. He had taken a gamble without a real fallback, and it reinforced his core belief in always protecting the downside. This brings us to the final story, and it's a perfect encapsulation of all these principles combined. It's the story of the West Side Yards, the massive 100-acre site where he first tried to build in the 70s. After he let his option expire, the property was sold to an Argentine developer named Francisco Macri. Macri spent years and over $100 million trying to get his project, Lincoln West, off the ground. But he made mistake after mistake. He was an outsider who didn't understand New York politics. He made far too many concessions to the city, agreeing to over $100 million in giveaways, like rebuilding a subway station and a Con Edison smokestack, before he had even sold a single apartment. His design was bland and uninspiring. And he could never secure financing. By 1984, Macri was in deep financial trouble, and his bank was about to foreclose. Trump stepped in. Because Macri was so desperate, and because Trump was one of the few developers with the resources and the vision to take on such a massive project, he was able to buy back the entire 100-acre site for just under $100 million. It was an incredible bargain. Years earlier, He had to walk away because the timing wasn't right and he didn't have the resources. Now, after the successes of the Hyatt and Trump Tower, he was ready. He immediately scrapped Mockery's boring plans and went back to his first principle: think big. He renamed the project Television City. He knew that NBC was considering leaving New York for New Jersey, which would be a huge psychological and economic blow to the city. He saw an opportunity for mutual interest. He had the one thing NBC needed that no one else in New York could offer: enough space to build massive, modern television studios. He used the potential of luring NBC to stay in New York as leverage with the city to get the approvals he wanted. And to capture the public's imagination, he announced that the centerpiece of Television City would be the world's tallest building. It was a bold, audacious vision. It was controversial, and it sparked intense debate. But it also generated a massive amount of free publicity, creating an instant mystique for a project that was still just a dream. That is the art of the deal: not just seeing what is, but seeing what could be, and then having the courage, the creativity, and the relentless drive to make it happen. Commentary. So, what do we take away from all of this? When you peel back the layers of the massive buildings, the high-stakes negotiations, and the larger-than-life personality, you find a set of principles that are surprisingly timeless and applicable to anyone with a dream, no matter how big or how small. The most powerful lesson, for me, is the idea of creating your own reality. Trump didn't wait for opportunities to fall into his lap. He created them. He saw a decaying hotel and envisioned a glittering success. He saw an abandoned rail yard and envisioned the world's tallest building. He didn't accept the world as it was. He saw it for what it could be, and then he bent every rule, pushed every boundary, and used every ounce of his energy to pull that vision into existence. This isn't just about real estate, it's a lesson in refusing to be limited by circumstance. Another profound idea is the power of persistence. Think about him writing letter after letter to the owner of Bonwit Teller, who had flatly rejected him. He kept going, for years, on the slimmest of hopes. And when the timing was finally right, he was the one who got the call. How many of us give up on an idea after the first no? This book is a testament to the fact that sheer, relentless persistence can often be the single difference between success and failure. And finally, there's the deep understanding of human nature. The art of the deal is really the art of understanding people. It's knowing that a handshake from a man like Walter Hoving is more binding than a 100-page contract from someone else. It's knowing that fear can motivate a city, that ambition can motivate a partner, and that pride can motivate a competitor. He understood what the other side wanted, what they feared, and what they needed, and he used that understanding as his ultimate form of leverage. So, what can you do with this, right now? First, start thinking bigger about your own life. What's your world's tallest building? What is the grandest vision you have for yourself? Don't be afraid of its scale. As the book teaches, if you're going to be thinking anyway, you might as well think big. Second, do your homework. Fred Trump taught his son to know the cost of everything. Before you go into any negotiation, whether it's for a raise, a car, or just convincing your parents of something, know your facts inside and out. Knowledge is leverage. And third, don't be afraid to ask. Trump wasn't afraid to ask for a 40-year tax abatement, for membership in an exclusive club where he knew no one, or for a chance to rebuild a skating rink when the city had failed for 6 years. The worst thing that can happen is someone says no. But if you don't ask, the answer is always no. That was a summary of Trump, The Art of the Deal. We've explored the highlights today, the big stories and the core principles. But I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you walk the path yourself. The true magic happens in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with you in a way you didn't expect. This journey we took was designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about, the ambition, the strategy, the sheer audacity, has resonated with you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you look at challenges and opportunities in your own life. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it sparked some new ideas for you, please show some support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the Billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.